general to gears. In the past, we have always seen science teachers as the ultimate source of information in the classroom. Meaning to say, science teachers are always expected to provide all the information to our students. And our students become mere recipients of the information. But modern theories on learning have already shown us that this is not really an efficient way of ensuring learning in our classroom, especially for our science classrooms. With the bulk of information available nowadays in the internet and in other sources, it is quite impossible for the teacher to become the ultimate source of information. We have to tap our learners so that there would be this desire, innate desire among them to look for the information. If information is already within the fingertips of our learners, what is then our role as science teachers? So that is where my presentation comes in. We need to shift gears in the sense that we no longer become the ultimate source of information, but rather we help in facilitating. We facilitate the learning, the acquisition of science process skills. Of course, embedded to this is the use of English as a medium of instruction. So let me start off with a little with a little exercise from among us. So it's like what I mentioned a while ago. I have also been a science teacher before I was transferred to the college, to the university, and eventually to the graduate school. So I'm always curious as to how do you see yourself as a science teacher? Can I request you to post a word on the chat box, just a word, okay? Post a word on the chat box that would describe a science teacher. Thank you very much for that. I saw an answer already. Let's see the others. Can you post a word that would describe a science teacher? You may think about your own experience, perhaps. Okay. You may think about yourself as a science teacher. How would you describe yourself? Or maybe you can think about what is an ideal science teacher for you. Can you think of a word that would describe a science teacher? I can see 2 answers on the chat box. Let's wait for the others. Thank you. Now there's 3. So I can see words like logic, profession, smart. What about the others? How do you perceive or how do you see a science teacher? There, hands-on activity master. Wow, I love that phrase. Okay, so we, as science teachers, we always look into designing hands-on activities, experiments perhaps, to engage our learners into the process. Enthusiastic. Wow, I also love that term. Thank you very much for sharing those words. Come on, what about the others? How else do you see a science teacher advice? Oh, perhaps our teacher here is thinking about giving advice, perhaps, to our learners or advising our learners. Observe and show. Those are quite interesting words. We use those words so often when we speak about different science activities. Okay, what about the others? Can you give us some other words that would describe a science teacher? Okay, gardener. Wow, that can easily be associated with our goal as science teachers to help our learners understand perhaps preservation and conservation of the environment, right? How to love nature, practice. Those are very nice words. Thank you very much. There, evidence. Wow, that's a very, very nice word, evidence. Since in science, we usually conduct experiment, we make conclusions, we make generalizations, and all of this should be based on evidences that we gather. Thank you very much for those words. So in one way or the other, we would have a common understanding of what we expect science teachers to be? At the very least, when they are in the classroom, we expect them to be perhaps evidence-oriented, data-oriented, right? When we ask learners, when we ask our students to conduct experiments, we always emphasize, you look at the data, observe the data, observe the setup, what changes are happening, right? And then we also show enthusiasm whenever we teach learners, right? I would always have a sort of a comparison whenever I handle an elementary science class and a high school science class. There's always a difference in the way kids, primary students, there's always a difference between how they look at science. For primary kids, they would always look at science with so much curiosity. In fact, when one pupil begins to ask questions, you expect more to come in. More questions would be generated in the process. Whereas when you speak of the high school students, they become more of the thinking type. Perhaps sometimes they do not really ask questions, but they are thinking. They would see things happening in the laboratory, and then they begin thinking. Okay, so with this kind of differences, we see that the characteristic of a science teacher must be clear to all of us, because this would anchor us into what kind of strategies should we implement within our classrooms. So thank you very much for those who shared their words for this exercise. So let's just step back a little. Let's just step back a little and try to revisit, refresh our ideas of what science is all about. Because before we go into the details of studying how to teach science, we need to first understand the very nature of the discipline. What is the discipline all about? What do we expect from among our learners while we teach this? Okay? Because if we do not know what to expect from our learners, it might not matter what kind of strategy we implement. Because at the end of the day, we will not be able to tell whether our strategies actually work or not, right? I know different countries, perhaps the Philippines, Taiwan, we may have different goals in mind. We may have different goals in mind in terms of our educational systems. But then again, when we speak of science as a form of as a discipline, what do we actually see? Science can be perceived as two things, two major definitions. The first one, we can define science as a body of knowledge. It's a collection of information that we have gathered, that people in the past, people in the present, they are gathering all of this information, they are putting together explanations, they are looking into trends and data in order to come up with explanations, discussions, theories, hypotheses to explain various phenomena in our environment. That's what we see when we say science is a body of knowledge. On the other hand, we can also see science as a form of a process. It's a process in a way that it tells us the procedures, the methodologies by which we can actually come up with a reasonable, a while ago I saw the word logic, a logical explanation to a certain question, right? So in this manner, we see that science is not just a topic that we teach or deliver in our classroom as part of the curricula. It is actually a process, a way of thinking. It is a way of thinking that we wish to develop to our learners to ensure that even after they've graduate, perhaps while they are in the field of work already, or even pass through that, or even while they are just living their ordinary daily lives, they would still be able to, let's say, solve problems, recognize patterns, gather information before formulating a certain conclusion, right? So these are some of the expectations that we have that we expect while we deliver this particular discipline. It is said there that science consists of observing the world by watching, listening, observing, and recording. Science is curiosity in thoughtful action about the world and how it behaves. This is the reason why when I was still handling science in the basic education, I usually hold my classes outside the classroom. I usually bring my students into the garden, in an open space within the campus, so that they can observe what is happening around them, what is actually what are the phenomena that they could observe in their surroundings. Because after they have finished, let's say, an hour session in my science class, we need to ensure that the thought processes are still there. Okay? They are still thinking about what happened, what it means to them. Okay? So it's a thought process. Then we have what we call the basic science process skills. Basic science process skills. Just like what I mentioned a while ago, science is not just a collection of information. Going back to the preliminary discussion that I had, we say that the science teacher is not just the ultimate source of information. Rather, we are now facilitating the development of different skills in our classrooms. Yes, there are topics that we need to cover while we are discussing, while we are teaching our students. These topics are explicitly identified in our science curriculum. However, embedded in the teaching of these topics are some process skills. For instance, if we are teaching our high school students the difference between, let's say, a plant and an animal cell, okay? If we are teaching them how to differentiate the characteristics of a plant from an animal cell, what kind of skills or which skills should we embed in our discussion, in our activities, such that they will not just be able to memorize, okay? They will not just be able to memorize, let's say, the different parts, but on a higher level, we may be able to teach them how to do proper differentiation, how to do proper differentiation, how to follow the different steps in order for them to come up with accurate inferences based on their observations, right? So in this slide, you would see some of the basic science process skills, which are taught even in the primary grades. So for example, we have their observing. In the primary grades, this could just be in the form of asking the students to, let's say, compare the sizes of things. It all starts on that portion. I would remember when we were tapped to roll out the science K to 12 program in our country. It was mentioned a while ago that I served as one of the regional trainer for the rollout of the science curriculum. One of the features of the science curriculum is the spiral progression of topics. When we say spiral progression, topics are repeatedly taught grade after grade. So say for example, grade science subjects, the science subject is taught starting grade 3. Science is a separate subject starting grade 3. So grade 3, they have physics, chemistry, biology, earth science. When they enter grade 4, they would again have those physics, chemistry, biology, and science and earth science. The same goes for grade 5, grade 6, up until they go to grade 10. There would be recurrence of topics, but with increasing complexity. Okay? So one of the questions that was raised by the science teachers during those times was, how am I going to teach a grade 3 pupil physics? How would I teach them physics? Isn't physics too difficult for a grade 3 pupil? When I heard those questions, what immediately came into my mind is a misconception of what physics is. Apparently, science teachers can easily think of physics as the mere study of motion in terms of computations, in terms of the laws of motion as explained by Newton, or perhaps the complexities of measuring energy and all those things. Well, that is actually physics. But how do you bring it down to a level that a grade 3 pupil would understand it? That a grade 3 pupil would be capacitated so that when he or she gets into the higher levels, it would be easy for him or her to understand the more complicated topics. It was then that they realized that when you teach little kids, primary students, when you teach them the idea of pushing and pulling, that is already physics. That is already the start of learning the idea of physics. You don't have to use those complicated words. You don't have to introduce the complicated formula that you have for physics, for computations. You don't really have to introduce the sophisticated instruments that we use in physics, in our physics experiments. But the mere fact that our learners at that level would understand that pushing requires this particular movement, pulling requires this particular movement, that is already a start, right? So in that case, when we ask our students, when we ask our students to observe, we don't really have to bring them to the laboratory and make sophisticated experiments just to tell them this is physics, or this is biology, or this is chemistry, right? Perhaps we just have to bring them to a garden, let them appreciate the flowers, let them appreciate the plants, let them see the colors of the plants in the garden. In terms of using English as a medium of instruction, we don't really have to make use of so many fancy words, because these are, yeah, there. One of the difficulties on teaching science in English is the scientific terms, right? At this particular level, we don't really have to use those big words that we use in science, right? The words that our learners learn based from different subjects can already be sufficient. Because at this point, let's say at the primary level, we are trying to gradually introduce them to the world of science, right? They are not blank slates in the sense that they have not seen anything around them. Sometimes we get that idea that our students can only learn in schools. Of course, that is not true, especially during this time. A lot, I have a student before, he was a grade 7 student. He was very fluent in English. He was very fluent in English. Um, Whenever he speaks, whether it's outside the classroom or during the class, he uses English very, very fluently. And that got me thinking, did he grow up in another country where English is really the first language? Because he speaks like that. During a parents' conference, I happened to meet her mother, or his mother, I mean. I happened to meet his mother. And I asked, I noticed that Ian, he was Ian. I noticed that Ian is very fluent in the English language. Did he have any special training? The answer of the mother was quite surprising. She said, "No, sir. He's never been out of the country." Oh, Where did he learn his English? Where did he learn how to speak like that? I think a lot of kids are experiencing this as well. They have been watching a lot of documentaries. He was very interested in science, that's why. He was watching a lot of documentaries in the Discovery Channel, in the National Geographic Channel. And basically, he was binge watching all of these documentaries, and he was able to imbibe all of this, the way they speak. So I was quite surprised with that scenario, because according to the mother, the cousins, the friends, the circle of friends of Ian do not really speak English. But the moment he went into school, he was very, very fluent. So just imagine how powerful media is. We might be thinking, oh, my students are not very good in the language. My students are not very good in the language. Well, you'll never know. You'll never know. Remember that our students have different exposures, perhaps. They might have different, they might have friends to whom they are able to practice the language. So yeah, they are wonderful sources. And when I heard of that story, I began telling my other students, try to watch more documentaries, try to watch more videos from these channels, because apparently I've seen Ian is very curious in the class. You know, he is asking a lot of questions. And those are the kind of students that we want in our classrooms. Okay. So some of the basic science process skills, we have observing, right? Inferring, of course, in varying levels, depending on the abilities of our students, depending on the demands of our curriculum. Measuring, communicating. I'll focus more on that later on. Classifying, predicting. So if you would notice, all of these skills are embedded in our science classrooms. If you have time, probably you can think about, how am I guiding my students into developing this? How am I giving enough opportunities for my students to develop this kind of skills, right? Because at the end of the day, the knowledge that we know right now, particularly the scientific knowledge, it continues to evolve, right? It continues to evolve. What we know right now may not be as accurate as we know eventually in the future. Perhaps new discoveries would change the way we see things. Okay? So, what would be the use of the information that we have shared to our students? Of course, we do not undermine those kind of information. But more importantly, we should highlight the skills. What would our students do with the information that they have learned from our classes? What would they do with that, right? So those are some process skills. Then we also have integrated process skills. So when we try to put together some of those basic science skills, when we are working on more complicated tasks, okay, more complex scientific tasks, experimentations perhaps in science, probably this works for those in the junior high school level or even in the senior high school level. Those are what we call integrated science process skills. Examples, how do we control variables when we design experiments, right? How do we encourage our learners to solve a certain problem, right? In science, we have what we call fair testing. Fair testing. In fair testing, we make sure that we are able to control the variables so that we can be assured that whatever the result is can be attributed to that target variable. If we are not able to control variables, it would be problematic to identify which caused the change. So there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of things going on between those two things. Formulating the question or identifying the question, and eventually designing the experiment, controlling the variables, planning the experiment, and looking at the data and attributing the data to whichever variable. It might look like a linear pattern, but there's a lot of going to and fro in the process. Okay? How do we teach our learners to define operationally? When we speak of operational definition, we always look into how our students understand a certain concept, and not just expecting them to parrot whatever definitions they have gotten from the book. And how do we develop this in a science classroom? We have to make them experience. A while ago, a phrase came out, hands-on activities. We are masters in terms of designing hands-on activities. Why do we design those kinds of activities? Because we want our learners to understand the concept and not just to memorize the concept. Okay? For example, some of our students may be able to define word per word based on the text. They may be able to define, recite word per word the law of inertia, the first law of motion. But it does not automatically mean that they actually understand it, right? It does not automatically mean that whenever they see inertia at work in the environment, they would easily be able to identify that, oh, that's inertia that is at work, right? So it is actually understanding the concept, getting a personal understanding of what the phenomenon is, an accurate understanding of what the phenomenon is. Then there's also formulating hypotheses. We understand, all of us science teachers would always emphasize that a hypothesis, while it is a guess, it is a guess, it is not just an ordinary guess, but an educated guess. And when we speak of an educated guess, you make use of your prior knowledge. You make use of your prior knowledge in order for you to come up with a possible prediction of what would happen. A possible prediction of what would happen. You don't just pull out explanations out of nowhere and propose it. So how do we teach our learners how to do that? Interpreting data. We allow our learners to look into graphs, tables. We allow them to look at patterns. We allow them to compare numbers they have gathered from experimentations. What do this data actually mean? How can we make sense out of this data? What kind of activities should we design in our classrooms? Experimenting. Are we teaching our learners good laboratory practices? Aside from the ability to properly design experiments, aside from the ability to control variables, are they actually doing it right in terms of implementing the experiments? Right? How do they monitor the gathering of data? The ethics in doing experimentations? And then formulating models. After doing all of these things, after looking into literature, reading things, reading materials, after asking people, after doing experimentations, how do you come up with the possible explanation to whatever you have observed? So how do we guide our learners? These are the tasks that we have as science teachers. As science teachers, I know that all of you who are attending this webinar right now, we all have the content expertise. Meaning to say, we have this. We know how to control variables. We know how to design experiments. We know how to formulate models. We know the content. We are experts of our discipline. But the bigger question, being teachers, is that how do we now transmit this to our learners? How do we encourage our learners to learn how to do this? And those, in most times, those are two different things. Those are two different dimensions. It is said that basic skills, the basic science process skills, can be taught. We can always teach our learners, okay, this is the proper way of doing observation. You start with this part. This is the proper way of designing an experiment. These are the different steps. These are the considerations in order for you to formulate a valid hypothesis. Okay? They can be taught and they can also be learned. And once our students are able to learn this, okay, once our students are able to learn this, they would be able to transfer this learning into new situations. Okay? They would be able to transfer this to new situations. But the question is, how do we design? How do we design science lessons that will promote these process skills? Okay? Throughout the entire webinar series, we will try to share with you some of the practices that our in-service teachers have implemented in their very own classrooms. Okay? For this session, I'll be sharing with you a particular experience that I had on how I was able to encourage my own students before to participate in the learning process. Because one key word for science is inquiry. Inquiry. Since science is all about tapping the curiosity of our learners, we need to make sure that we follow the inquiry approach. Meaning to say, we always start with encouraging our learners to ask questions. We always encourage our learners to ask questions about what they think about the environment, what they think about what they perceive. Okay? Inquiry is an approach to learning that engages our natural curiosity and desire to make sense of the world. It encourages the asking of questions and the seeking of answers to those questions through investigations and explorations. I would always believe that our learners in our science classrooms, they would always have a lot of questions in mind. They would always have a lot of questions in mind. And believe me, there are a lot of instances wherein I was asked by my students about certain questions and I did not know the answer. I did not know the answer. And basically that aligns to what I have been talking about a while ago. We are not the sole source of information. It will always happen. It will always happen no matter how good we are in the field, in our discipline. Students, learners will always think of questions that would make us also think. Sorry, okay. A question that would also make us think. I'm not sure how I can make it bigger. Anyway, I would just read the text. Yeah. Oh, I see. So I saw a comment from Dr. Jean right there. Taiwan science curriculum does not include a unit on the scientific method. I guess process skills teaching are embedded in each lesson. Yes, that's right. In the Philippines, we have a specific unit on the scientific method. It's actually introduced, if I'm not mistaken, around grade 6. It's introduced explicitly in grade 6, but it's also embedded in the earlier grades. It's just that teachers do not want to introduce the heavy science terminologies at the early grades because in the States, it's in grade 4, I see. So perhaps we can always look into the curriculum and check how is the scientific method being embedded or integrated in the lessons. Because sometimes there is a need to explicitly teach it, explicitly guide our learners to the different stages. Okay, so going back, so the inquiry approach is quite important because it encourages our learners to ask questions, right? To ask questions and seek for answers through investigations. Inquiry requires active engagement. It requires active engagement of students in the process. I have included in this slide the entire cycle of the inquiry process, but I will not be focusing on that. What I would like to emphasize in this diagram is, or are the different phases. So you have their question, predict, plan, investigate, record, analyze, interpret, connect, and then it goes back to asking questions again. Okay? So there's a lot of things going on. But I will not be discussing each part. Okay? I will not be discussing each part. There, right? Okay. What I would like to emphasize here is that if you would notice, across all of these stages, communication is essential. Communication is essential. Think about it. We have designed an inquiry-based lesson, but our students would not talk. They would not talk. They would not share their minds. They would not speak their minds. They would not want to share their ideas. Say, for example, in our class, we always encourage our students to speak in English. During our science classes, we always encourage our students to speak in English. There were a lot of times, especially when you are in the lower grades, wherein some students would be discouraged to participate in the class because, for one, they believe that they are not fluent in the language. Okay? And that's a very big hurdle. That's a very big challenge for a science teacher, because how will you initiate the process if your students would not talk? If your students would not communicate what's in their head, what's in their mind? Looking at the entire process here, communication is key. We need to work with our learners. We need to communicate with them. And when we speak of communication, of course, we refer to the macro skills. We need to ask our students to read, to write, to speak, to listen. So if we are transforming our classrooms and we are using English as a medium of instruction, how do we go about this challenge? Okay? So this is the big question that I had when I was teaching science in the elementary and the high school. How do we encourage our students to engage into inquiry if we are using English as a medium of instruction? This may not be the only way. Okay, this may not be the only way. There. How do we provide scaffolding? Correct. This may not be the only way, but I think this is how it is. Just like what I've been emphasizing a while ago, let the students communicate with each other, with their teachers, with the experts. An interesting question posted by Dr. Jane on the chat box. How do we provide scaffolding? If we want our students to talk in our classrooms, okay? If we want our students to talk in our classrooms, if we want them to collaborate, to communicate, to tell us what is in their head, to encourage them to ask questions, what do we do? So let me share with you my experience on how I did it. I tried to figure out, why are my students not participating in class? Why are they not participating in class? Is it because they're not fluent in the language? Or is it because they don't know the concept or the topic? These are two feasible reasons. And then I tried out something. The confidence to participate in a classroom discussion begins with knowing what the topic is, having some background knowledge. If our students would get into our classroom empty-handed, they don't know anything, it would really be challenging. It is not impossible, but it would be very, very challenging to encourage them to participate. In fact, it would take a lot of effort from the teacher. It would take a lot of effort from the teacher to design an activity, to allow the students to acquire all the inputs that they need. Of course, before we ask our students to participate in any science activity, we need to provide them with some sort of inputs so that they would have some sort of background information on how to do the activity. Many times, we science teachers become frustrated because our students are not doing the task the way we expect it to be done. And then, if we try to introspect, the reason is that they do not have the prerequisite knowledge and skills about the topic. So I figured that probably my students need time to have the prerequisite knowledge and skills so that they would be more confident to join the discussion, they would be more confident to ask questions, and they would be more confident to participate in whatever activity I designed in the classroom. So as a form of a scaffolding for them, I usually provide them with a lot of materials before our classroom discussion, before our activity. But it's not just any kind of material. You need to understand your learners. You need to understand your learners. What is their level in terms of, let's say, reading English texts? Because we might be providing them with an English text, with a science material that is too difficult for them to understand. The words may be too complex already, and it would already take a lot of their time trying to understand those terminologies or texts or words. It is then that I found this. I do not know if you are familiar with this. This is a YouTube channel that I love using in my classroom. It's Crash Course. If anybody has used it or anybody has passed through the channel, you can post on the chat box. It's Crash Course. Crash Course is a channel in YouTube that basically comes up with a lot of tutorials, short videos about different topics, not only in science. What I love about Crash Course is that they're presenting very difficult ideas in a very, very easy, very animated, in a very animated way. They're using very simple language, simple English. If there are some difficult terminologies, they will define them. So pedagogically speaking, thank you, Dr. Jane. Pedagogically speaking, I think this works for our beginners, the beginners in our classrooms. What I usually do is I pick a certain video. Say, for example, I'll be teaching the students subatomic particles. There is a video there that talks about subatomic particles. And it presents the idea in a very, very simple and animated way that even those students who did not have any prior knowledge of what an atom is or what an electron is, they would already be engaged into thinking about the topic. And that is the first step. Allow the students to think about the topic. Apart from that, my hidden intention in asking them to view this kind of videos is for them to be familiar with the language. For them to be familiar with the language. Just like my story a while ago about Ian, okay? Once they get to watch this kind of videos, they get to imbibe the language as well. If you would notice on the slide, there's also subtitles from among their videos. So they're actually targeting learners who would like to understand the topic but are having some sort of difficulty. But take note, this is just a starting point, okay? This kind of materials are just starting point. Of course, we still have to do our tasks, our work in the classroom. Again, this kind of assignments are the things that I give before asking my students to attend my science class. So you might want to consider looking through them. They are also helpful for teachers. Since you are looking for possible materials that can help you, perhaps you can also visit this site, Crash Course. Okay. it works both ways. So in my experience, it was this particular process. I asked them to view this kind of video, this kind of material, and then they go to my class. They already have the background knowledge. They have already imbibed the language. They know the words to be used to discuss the topic because they have heard it, right? And then I can also provide them with some reading materials in order for them to be more familiar with the topic. You see, when they have already been exposed to the concept, it is easier for them to digest succeeding materials. Okay, the discussion would be easier for them. So it works both ways. On the perspective of the students, they're able to go through the available materials. They become familiar with the concept. They become familiar with the language. Okay. Take note. In our school, not everybody is really fluent in the language, in the English language. So it was very helpful, especially for those kids who are really having some difficulty communicating themselves in English. So they get to um, formulate sentences even before they attend classes because they have already heard it, they have seen it, they have read something about it. Then, during the class, they are able to apply what they learned. You can ask them to do an activity and then they would be able to recall what they have seen, they would be able to recall what they have read, and then contextualize the experience. It is then that they begin to link whatever they learned from the material, from the activity, and their experiences. And these links would basically reinforce the retention. It is fascinating whenever I get to talk with some students, they would always be able to recall some of the activities that we've done in our classroom. Okay? They would always be able to talk about what was done in the classroom and what was the associated concept to that. There was a time I asked the students, I brought my science class into the kitchen. There was a home economics classroom in our school. So I brought my chemistry class into the home economics building. And we prepared various meals. Okay. And then when I asked them, why did we do that? Why did we have our class there? It was very easy for them to think about the topic. The topic then was about mixtures. We were studying heterogeneous, homogeneous mixtures. So they were doing a lot of different um, mixtures in the form of food preparations. So something like that. So try to link it with the experiences of our learners. In terms of the teachers, you as teachers could also benefit in this kind of arrangement. Teachers can browse through the resources. I also do that. Okay, sometimes there are some very complicated topics in science, and you need to find a way to make it simpler so that you can deliver it easier to our students. So I try to look for references, resources that would somehow simplify the approach. Okay, so Crash Course is a very, very nice tool that I have seen. It's a very nice resource that I have seen. Sometimes I even use the approach that they implement in delivering the lesson, how they were able to scaffold and structure the lesson. So you can basically review the resources available, familiarize the language, what are the terminologies that you need to emphasize for a certain session, and the flow of ideas. I think in science, it is very important that we have a very clear flow of ideas so that there would be a very coherent assimilation of the concept. Okay? And then, once we have already visualized how are we going to teach this, considering everything, including how are we going to deliver this in English, okay? We can design the learning task. If we are not so confident with our language, we can always design a task such that our inputs could be in other forms. Maybe our input could be in the form of a video that we can show to the class. a very easy to read reading material, perhaps, a listening activity, perhaps, okay? Just enough for our students to have that inputs so that they would be able to properly and accurately complete the task that we have designed for them. And then contextualize the experience. This is quite important. Okay, very important. We need to make the learning relevant to our learners. And how do you do that? Perhaps you look into the local context. What's the experiences of our learners? In our university, we are always reminded by our administrators to always try to understand our learners. You would always hear that from our administrators, from the deans to the vice president. Understand the learners. What do they know? Okay? What is around them? What do they experience? Because once we understand what our students are experiencing, we are able to come up with very relevant learning experiences for them that are very close to their heart, very close to their experiences. And that enhances the retention. That enhances the association of the new learning to their prior understanding, to their prior knowledge. So it might work that way. Perhaps you might still be asking, why do I have to use English as a medium of instruction in teaching science? My students can already understand this, but why do we still have to do this? I can only think of two based on what I have experienced as a teacher. Okay? The first one, whenever I ask my students to come up, let's say, with a technical report on their experimentation, or maybe a term paper, or maybe I ask them to come up with a certain presentation or an invention, perhaps, most of the time, the resources that they can find are in English. Most of the resources available are in English. So if we are not developing, or if we are not providing our learners, our science students, the opportunities to familiarize themselves with the language, no matter how simple it is at the moment, they might find it difficult to engage with these kinds of resources. Say, for example, academic journals that are published internationally, they are usually written in English. Videos that are available for the teaching and learning are usually in English. So if we provide opportunities for our learners to at least be familiar, okay, familiarize themselves with the language, they might have access, more access, wider access to all of this information. Okay? So that's one. And of course, as science teachers, we want that, right? We want them to explore the world. We want them to explore the information that is made available to them. Okay? The second one, it is easier to build networks with other experts around the world. I had an activity before with my primary kids, primary students. We were talking about some diseases in the body. And the exercise that I gave them is I asked them to interview doctors or somebody who is related to the medical field. Okay. Some of them were able to contact doctors from other countries. They were able to interview. Well, there's during those times there was Skype. They were doing Skype. Okay. They had an uncle who is a doctor in, let's say, the United States. They were able to set up an appointment and they were able to interview the doctor. Of course, during those times, they have to use English to facilitate the communication. There was also a time that I asked them to interview a scientist. Okay, because I think we were talking about, if I'm not mistaken, we were talking about the weather. These are grade 7 kids. These are grade 7 students. We're talking about the weather, and they were quite interested with the weather in different countries. The weather in different countries. Well, there's Facebook already during that time. And they can easily find friends from different countries and ask them, how's the weather? What do you experience? And then English is an effective way to communicate with these people because they have friends in, let's say, Japan, they have friends in Taiwan, they have friends in Singapore, in Vietnam. My Filipino students will not be able to speak Vietnamese or Taiwanese, but they can actually communicate with each other through English. See how wonderful I could always remember that activity because that was a very, very meaningful activity that I had with my class. I had one student who discussed the weather in Vietnam because he was able to interview a friend who is living there. And they were able to compare it with the weather in the Philippines, the climate in the Philippines. They were able to come up with charts of different countries and the climates, the weather, and all. And that is when they are able to look at trends, patterns. They were able to make a lot of realizations. So imagine in that situation, how English as a medium of instruction is able to come up, is able to build opportunities to our learners. Well, apart from the fact that technology made it possible, right? So these are affordances. These are affordances that can be available for us once we embrace this kind of English as a medium of instruction for teaching science. For the next few Saturdays, I invite you to attend our other webinars. Just like what was mentioned a while ago, this is a collaborative effort. When we were designing the webinar, we were thinking of how to best help our learners, our teachers in Taiwan. Um, we have our content experts. We have our content experts, those teachers who have been handling the subject for quite some time. We tapped on our basic education science teachers because they have been exposed to teaching science in English, both in a synchronous and synchronous environment. They have also experienced delivering it in face-to-face instruction modality. I'm pretty sure that they would be able to share a lot of personal experiences on how they handle the challenges on the perspective of a teacher. We also tap public school science teachers, okay? Because again, there's a different context. Maybe it could enrich further our understanding of the challenges and perhaps the different strategies that we can implement to cope with these challenges, which is more important, of course. And then we have also tapped our language experts so that they could also integrate language teaching practices, teaching and learning practices into all of these things. So in the succeeding Saturdays, we hope that you would be able to learn more about all of these topics, and we hope to see you so that we can further share our own experiences in teaching science in English. Okay, so I think that would be the end of my talk for this morning. If you have questions, please feel free.
Thank you so much for introducing us to you know how you conduct classes, how to foster processing skills in science and scientific inquiry, providing us with a crash course website. I noticed that there are a lot of different subjects, like
Yes.
including physics, chemistry, biology, but not only that, there's history and linguistics and everything there. It's a wonderful resource to explore, and I particularly um, enjoyed, and I think it's a brilliant idea for you to have your students interview friends from different countries and to gather like weather information or climate from different regions of Asia, and getting like firsthand information from citizens living there. And I think that's way like it's it's so much better than memorizing the facts and or numbers from the textbook. I think that's a wonderful idea of getting real communication and cross cultural and and getting to communicate about or learning more about scientific topics from students from from different countries. Thank you so much, Dr. Tayag.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jane.
Yay. Do you have any questions?
Questions?
Questions from the audience? Do we have any questions from the audience?
Just to share, there was another.
Mm-hmm.
I think YouTube is becoming a very, very powerful nowadays. There was a time. Do you know that NASA is actually streaming live from the International Space Station?
Yes.
Yeah,
And I like the and they have like a if you subscribe to their uh you no 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 Twitter.
yeah.
Well, I subscribe to what's that this other Twitter account of theirs. So every time they're launching a rocket, I would get a notice and watch it live. But
There was a no, not really a competition, an activity that they launched before, and I asked some of my kids to join. Send a letter to NASA.
oh.
So yeah, send a letter to the International Space Station. So they would just be writing a letter, and they can actually send it to the astronauts in the International Space Station. It was a very nice activity, especially for my students, since of course they would be required to write the letters in English. So that's
Mm-hmm.
again topping another macro skill, and they would be able to see the space real time.
What that's wonderful. Yeah. You've got all these wonderful ideas for your students. We
Thank
love
you.
you. We love to hear more.
Well, in the succeeding Saturdays, I will be. I have invited a lot of more brilliant science teachers. Well, I have been. I taught in the basic education like for 10 years. The last time was like around 2015. So I'm sure that a lot of new things are happening now in the basic education. So
Hmm.
I'm sure that they would be able to share a lot more.
Hmm. Thank you. Because one of our like uh, questions that we have is like, what scientific terms should we introduce to the students? Are they too difficult? Um, for example, the different types of plants. The plant names are well, usually long and hard to remember. But one of the teachers were introduced. She was introducing aquatic plants,
Yeah.
but yeah, but and using like prepositions like above or like under or simple prepositions to help students differentiate the different types of water plants, aquatic plants. So yeah, sorry,
Yeah, that's a so
yeah,
it's okay.
sorry.
Yeah, that's another way to look at it. I mentioned a while ago that science as a separate subject is taught starting grade 3 in the
Hmm.
Philippines. So for grades 1 and 2, there is no separate science subject, but the science concepts are integrated in the other subjects. For example, when they look at, let's say, um, when they look at animals, right? When they're discussing nouns, sorry, when they're discussing nouns, usually they introduce different kinds of animals or different kinds of plants. And these words that our students learn from grades 1 and 2, they become part of the science lesson when they enter grade 3 and the succeeding grades. So they are introduced in those kinds of subjects.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think we do the same as well. Like in the first grade and second grade, they will be exploring the different types of seeds and like or
Mhm.
or even planting plants from like starting by like different. They would plant different types of plants and observe the plant cycle, and then when they get
Yeah.
into third grade, there will be it will be more like they will have topics and they will know like more about how to conduct scientific inquiry or the different types of leaves or and all that. So we do have like science from first and second grade, and it's integrated as well. It's we integrated in our live curriculum. So in that live curriculum, it's not just science, but also like music, arts, and yeah. So
There was
um,
a, just to share, Dr. Jane, there was a
yes.
time, I think related to what you were saying is that the role of science teachers probably is to um, determine determine how ready are our learners for these kinds of science terms, because there are terms that are very very complex that even if you introduce them, let's say at an early grade, they will not be understood. Just
Mhm.
an experience that I would like to share. When I
Mhm.
was handling grade 4,
Mhm.
there was a textbook that my students are using, and there's the word ionization. Ionization in a grade 4 textbook. And
Oh. No.
and then while I was reading the text material, I said, how can I make my students understand this word?
What does
Ionization.
that what does that even mean?
Right. So what I did is I had to change the way the lesson is to be delivered,
Mhm.
because I cannot introduce that word to the students. It would just raise a lot more questions that they may not be ready to understand yet. So
Mhm.
we need to make sure that perhaps it's also part of curriculum review, perhaps,
Mhm.
which particular terminologies are appropriate for a certain grade level, such
Mhm.
that it would not cause confusion, perhaps,
Mhm.
or even misconceptions from
Mhm.
among our science students.
Mhm. Great example. But I mean, like igneous rock, metamorphic rock, to our Taiwanese students, they're also difficult. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah. So, but yeah, it's yeah
As a strategy done by our science teachers with that, uh, the types of rocks are taught in grade 5.
mhm, mhm,
So in a typical science classroom, you would normally see a lot of exhibits
mhm,
of rocks with their names
mhm.
label. So every time that the kids roam around the classroom, they would see the names. And now that I'm realizing that perhaps that is a strategy done by our science teachers so that
Mhm.
they would be more familiar with these kinds of terminologies.
Yes, yes. Thank you, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think that concludes Dr. John Tayag's session. Let's give him another round of applause.
Thank you.
Oh,
I can
Chris
see.
here
Yeah.
says, yeah, says, hello, Professor Tayag. I'm Chris, a student from National Kaohsiung University of Science and Technology. Thanks for sharing your experience and ideas of teachers. I have one question. You mentioned that you would encourage students to watch Discovery or such wonderful educational learning resources, but what if the students are not interested in it? Do you have any suggestions for teachers who are encouraging this kind of issue?
Okay, that's a very nice question. Um, it goes back to understanding our learners. Okay, it goes back to understanding our learners. What do they want to watch? What is their interest? What is their interest? We understand that they have diverse interests, perhaps. We have to understand why are they not why are these kind of videos not appealing to them. Okay, in my experience, I have students who are more into watching science fiction movies. They're more into watching science fiction movies. Do you know that there are times wherein I have this group of pupils and I usually talk to them. We are just discussing science fiction. But when we are discussing science fiction, we're talking about which is true, which is possible, and which is not. An example,
Oh, yeah.
an example. There was a time we were talking about Journey to the Center of the Earth. The movie Journey to the Center of the Earth. So I'm not sure if you have watched that movie, but it was based on the novel by Jules Verne.
Mm-hmm.
So they were so fascinated with the movie, with all the effects and all, with the storyline and all. But after watching the film, I asked them, which do you think of all of those events, which do you think are possible and which are not? And it was that was my scaffold to discuss with the kids tectonic theories. Because Journey to the Center of the Earth, they went down, they found some diamonds and all, they found the magma chamber and all. So it's basically tapping on the interest of our learners. Maybe they are not into the straightforward documentary films. They may not be interested on that, but maybe they're interested to this kind of things. So how do we tap? How do we tap the interest? We need to understand our learners. Talk to them. You need to talk to them.
That's a great example, and another example that I thought of after you've introduced the concept of tapping to what they're interested in is like um, talking about gravity in Minecraft.
Oh yeah,
Yes,
right.
something like that, like in a context where they're familiar with and what they love, and then you talk about science concepts there. Which one is like, is it true or is it possible or is it not, like not a reality in this case? So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we can have a 10-minute break, and at 10:30 we will start our next session. Thank you, Dr. Tayag.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jane. Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
And it offers suggestions.
Welcome back. Michelle, can you pull up the slides for us, please? Thank you. The next topic is English as a tool for teaching and learning science, to be led by Dr. Angelita Romero. Dr. Angelita Romero has an MA in English language teaching, PhD in applied linguistics, postgraduate degree in reading and language education, and language teaching certificate. She is a guest faculty at Angeles University Foundation School of Graduate Studies. She also held positions in Philippine Normal University, including graduate school professor, department head of the Reading and Literacy Department, dean of the College of Education, and vice president for academics. She is also a former president of the Reading Association of the Philippines. Under her presidency, the association hosted a World Congress in Reading. She is also involved in the International Literacy Association as a member of a group that conceptualized the first professional standards for reading professionals, editorial board member of the Reading Teacher Journal, country representative to IRA or ILA, International Development Committee for Asia, and chapter advisor, founder of Alpha Upsilon. She is also a textbook writer, editor, and consultant. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Angelita Romero. Dr. Romero.
Hello.
Hi.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good
Good morning, Jean. It's nice to see you
Good
again.
morning.
Nice to see you again.
Good morning.
Yeah. Oh, well, this is a webinar on this teaching using English in science teaching.
Mhm.
It must be a sequel of what we did last time. You remember I talked about reading in the
Yes,
content
wonderful.
areas? but that is for
Mm-hmm.
beginners, for students, and not necessarily for
Mm-hmm.
teachers. And we talk about reading in the content areas, not necessarily for
Yes.
science, but for content areas in
Mm-hmm.
general, for varying disciplines. But this time, I think your focus is on science. I'm not a science teacher, and I'm glad Jaren gave you a very broad background about science teaching. And I will be talking about the other side of the program, which is the use of English as a tool for the teaching and learning of science. I am very much, it's a pleasure to be with you again, fellow educators in Taiwan. And I am all in praise for the collaborative effort of the Taipei University and Angeles University Foundation for this kind of effort that you're doing for English teaching. English teaching that's meaningful, English teaching that is relevant, English teaching that is useful for everyone, and not just for learning the language per se, but using it in our everyday life, especially nowadays when everybody is talking about globalization and internationalization. We cannot help but learn a foreign language like English. Now, my focus actually, although our topic is teaching using English to teach science, I will be focusing on broad concepts, and these broad concepts will be will be substantiated through illustrative lessons by the succeeding speakers. And that is one main point I would like you to consider. And then the second is that I would like to say that to be able to use English in teaching science, the foundational knowledge of English is very necessary. The foundational knowledge in general English. Because in using English for specific domains or specific disciplines, I have an observation that is it is mostly on vocabulary and perhaps some language structures or styles that matter. But the basic structures of English is what matter. If we know our general English, I think we have the enabling skills to learn how to use English in any specific area where English is used as the medium of instruction. So, for example, if you teach science, it is necessary that you know a basic sentence structure. Like there is a subject, there is a predicate, there is verb subject agreement, etc., etc. So, our basic knowledge in English, which I consider foundational knowledge in the English language, is very important. Now, I'm glad that we work together, Taiwan and the Philippines. And of course, I would like to acknowledge Dr. Jarent and Dr. LB for involving me in the team to work with, to join you in this collaborative effort. Now, you know, Taiwan and the language situation in Taiwan and the Philippines, I find some commonalities. First, the teachers are non-native speakers of English. The students are non-native speakers of English, yet we have a passion to use English. We want our students to learn English. We want our teachers to use English to teach, yet our native language is not English. But we have that passion. The Filipinos are passionate in trying to learn English. Although I would say there are also impediments as well as facilitative factors. Now, another similarity is that I read a little about the language planning in Taiwan. I think you were also colonized by some powers, and there were times when the language of these countries were imposed to the people of China. So that until now, your language policies are affected by these historical happenings. Same thing with the Philippines. We were colonized by foreign powers, and for a time we had to learn Spanish, we had to learn Japanese, and we had to learn English, and English dominated. Um, Now, in our attempt to learn English, I know there are facilitative factors. The motivation of our students, of our teachers is very strong. In the Philippines, for example, learning English has its instrumental value. For upward mobility, we have to learn English. That is the situation in the Philippines. But then, some impediments arise also. There is that attitude of sustaining, strengthening the Filipino identity so that we just cannot sacrifice our native languages. Same thing with Taiwan. I think you are struggling also for Taiwanese identity. And I think you have your Polo, Hakka, are those native languages in Taiwan, and you have to learn them. You want your identity, yet we want to align our goals with international concerns, with globalized concerns. So that is the situation. And it's not an easy thing to strike a balance between establishing some kind of identity and at the same time teaching a foreign language. And we have some factors to consider. We have to be very careful in teaching a foreign language. Now, probably in the Philippines, we have some little advantage over the Chinese or over the Taiwanese because ever since, I think, for quite a number of years, English has been used as the medium of instruction. In fact, during my early years of schooling, English was the sole medium of instruction. I was a grade one pupil with no preschool education. I went to school. I had my own mother tongue. And we went to school. The teacher started talking to us in English. Everything was in English, I tell you. We read the book in English. We read in quotation marks. I memorized the book. I look at the words. I can say all the words. But mind you, I did not understand a thing. That is how I learned my English from the beginning. But fortunately, this is not how it is done these days. So that is another commonality. And I think there is another commonality. We are very much concerned with this phenomena of globalization and internationalization. And so I think that will solve the problem of motivation in a way, because a while ago somebody asked Dr. Tayag how you make students like something like doing things in science. Now, if people don't like English, we have to do something about it. If we think English is important, then we have to do something. That's why we have what we call motivation. And what is my simple definition of motivation? It's making people like things which otherwise they would not like. They don't like English, but we have to do something to make them like English. Okay? Now, it's just like telling children to eat vegetables. They don't like vegetables. They like hot dog. They like burger. Now, how do we make our children like burger? How do we make our children like vegetables? If you ask them, they would like ice cream as early as breakfast. Now, how do we maneuver? How do we manipulate their taste? How do we make them like something which they do not like? So that's a big challenge for teachers. If there are some problems, if there are some impediments in the teaching of English, if some students do not like to learn English. Now, because English is not our native language, it's expected that it will take some time to what we may call reach a level of proficiency that's very ideal. So you will not wonder, you will not be surprised if in the process of learning English, many of our students or even teachers or even professionals committing a number of errors. Well, some linguists, some educators would refrain from using errors. To be euphemistic, they would rather use deviations. Is that right, Jane? We are kind to people. They don't commit errors. They just deviate from what we call standard English. If we believe in prescriptive grammar, we try to go by the rules given in the textbooks. And anything that is not compliant to the rules in the textbooks are considered errors or deviations. We may construct sentences that are not grammatically acceptable. We might use words that are not semantically acceptable. So these are things that we have to learn. Now, this is general English. Now, in the Philippines, a teacher of science in the elementary level is usually a generalist. Usually, the elementary school teacher did not have or does not have an area of concentration, although there are areas of concentrations offered. For example, a Bachelor of Elementary Education student may opt to specialize in science teaching or in math teaching. But in the school where I worked for quite a long time, for about 41 years, which is a state university, the National Center for Teacher Education, which is the Philippine Normal University, the area of concentration is not obligatory. It's optional on the part of the student. It's taken over and above the basic curriculum. Although these days, if I remember right, there are built-in concentrations where the student may choose to be in special education, and the other specialization is to have more areas in liberal education. But otherwise, the specialization in the other subject areas is not required. Now, this elementary school teacher now teaches English, yet his education or her education is English is barely 9 units, although lately it was made into 12 units. Now, the general education courses are similar for all students in college. If you take engineering, you may take 9 units of English. If you take nursing, you may take 9 units of English for your general English courses. Now, the problem there is the nursing student will not teach English. The nursing student will use English for her own purpose, for her job. And the engineering student will use English for her own purpose. Now, the teacher will use English not only for her own purpose of communicating but she will be teaching English at the same time. So you see the difference? So the nursing student will learn English and she will know her is and are. She will know her verb subject agreement. She will know what a pragmatic sentence is, what a run-on sentence is. But for the teacher, that is not enough. When the student commits, when the student deviates from what we call standard English, the teacher must be able to explain why. Why is it that it's not acceptable to say, I gave the book to she? Why should it be, I gave the book to her? Why should it be that way? Now, the nursing student doesn't have to explain that. The engineering student doesn't have to explain that to people. But the teacher will do something and she needs a meta language to explain to the student why it's not acceptable to say, I gave the book to she. It should be, I gave the book to her. Although some student will say, the correct sentence, ma'am, is I gave the book to her. And why should it be her? I don't know. It sounds good. That's just the answer of the student. And the teacher, it will be very nice if the teacher will be able to explain why it should be that way. So that's the difference. So there is the problem now. When you are a science teacher, you teach not only concept, but you have a two-pronged job. You teach the language as well, either tangentially, serendipitously, or formally. You have to do something so that they will learn the medium used to learn science or used to teach science. So in the Philippines, I know where Taiwanese are coming from. The Taiwanese teachers are coming from. Uh, you are teachers, you are non-native speakers of English, you are teachers in the Philippines, you are non-native speakers of English, and it's not surprising for us to commit deviations, to do errors, and we do something about it. Well, if you subscribe to Corder, to call their errors analysis. Then we do some error analysis to find out what these errors are, and we hypothesize on what is possibly causing these errors. Now, to give you an idea of what deviations we see in the Philippines, so that you know that we are also encountering the same problems as you are encountering in Taiwan. In spite of our long use of the English language, our students, our teachers, even professionals, still deviate from what we may call the acceptable standard English. Now, in Taiwan, I think you're yielding to British English. Is that right, Dr. Jim?
American
In the
English.
Philippines?
American
Oh,
English.
is it American English?
Yes,
Good.
yes.
So in the Philippines, it's also American English. So we see some deviations, and I collected them from social media, and I show them to others, and I suggested that this may be possible teaching materials for you. You will have an idea of what our students, of what our people are committing as far as the English language is concerned. And I would like to show you some of this, and let's find out if this is also common in Taiwan, just so you will be convinced that we have similar problems, because English is not our native language. So let us look at some of this. All right. Now, this one, um, it says no entry, entrance only. This signage, poster, and it was placed somewhere where there is something that has to be done. There is something expected of people or motorists to be done. Now, do you understand what it says? Do you have, do you
It's
interpret it properly?
contradictory messages. No entry, but this is entrance only.
Right. Now, what is the possible message of the one who constructed this?
No idea.
All right. So this is something that we see in the Philippines. I do not know if you see something of this kind in Taiwan. So you see our problems. I mean, these things that we see in the environment will give us insights on what to do about instruction. We have a better way of preparing our blueprint of instruction if we have data to support us about things that our students don't know. Although I would like to believe that this one was prepared by somebody who's probably a graduate of grade 7 or grade 6 and not having reached the college level. Now let's look at another one. Christmas price, slain bag, 180 pesos. Do you get the message? Slain bag, 180 pesos. Now, do you have an idea of what a slain bag is? That must be a dangerous bag if it's a slain bag. So probably what the one who prepared this means is it's a sling bag. You know what a sling bag. But the phonological similarity of sling and slain was, well, the student was struck by the phonological similarity of sling and slain, especially so if the one who prepared comes from a place where there is a free variation of the vowel A and I, that they can be interchangeable and there will be no change in meaning. So when the one who prepared this hears the word sling, for that person, slain is okay. He hears it as slain. You know, our orientation in our mother tongue, in our vernacular, will affect the things that we hear. For example, in the Philippines, the sound of the cat is meow. Now, in English books, in American books, if you read this, the sound made by the cat, it is meow. In the Philippines, it is meow. Now, for Americans, it cannot be meow because in the American language system, they don't have, in the phonological structure, they don't have the initial ng sound, the nga. They don't say meow, so they say meow. So this one, probably it is the mother tongue of this, or the one who prepared this, that affected the spelling that he made use of. Now this one, road work ahead. Please apologize. Do you get the message, teachers? You have an idea of what the message is all about? There is something going on. There is road work. And they are, the one who prepared this, probably the message is they are apologizing for the inconveniences because of the road work construction. Now, the one who constructed this is the deviation is that the student does not have any idea about imperative sentences, that when you just use the word apologize, even the spelling is not acceptable. When you just write a verb, it is it's you are asking somebody to do something. Now that is the message that the one who prepared this wants to put across. So there is what you call the error or the deviation from standard English. Now look at the other sample. We need sales lady, not boy. Na is a Tagalog term meaning who is a boy. We need sales lady who is a boy. Now, do you know why? Can you hypothesize why the error is, why the construction is such that there is a need for a sales lady who is a boy? Now, in the Philippines, sales lady, the term sales lady has reached a level of becoming a generic term for somebody who works as a sales clerk. Uh, so far, we don't hear the term sales boy. So in this case, a certain store wants a salesperson, not necessarily a lady, but a male. So the one who prepared this, wrote this notice, we need a sales lady, but must be a boy. Uh, the one who prepared this considered sales lady a generic term for somebody who is doing clerical job on sales. Now, this is very similar to refrigerator. For a while in the Philippines, the Frigidaire, which is a brand, is taken synonymously with refrigerator. So if somebody wants to buy a refrigerator, who would say, we need a new Frigidaire. And then they will buy not a Frigidaire brand, but probably a Panasonic, a National, a Sharp, or whatever brand. The same thing with Colgate. Colgate is a very popular toothpaste in the Philippines, but there are other brands. But somebody would say, I will buy Colgate, but I want, what's another brand? Happy or Close Up. There are other brands. Yes. So these things are happening. This kind of poster signages are visible in the language environment of our learners. Now, panting wet, not touch. If you see this sign, do you get the message, teachers? You have an idea of the message? Panting wet, not touch. The error here must be in the word panting. Now, I don't think the Filipino who prepared this one knows the meaning of panting. So what he meant probably was painting, because panting will not co-occur appropriately with the rest of the words. You don't say panting wet, not touch. You know the meaning of panting, hard of breathing, but painting will very well co-occur with the rest of the words in the signage. Face mask, 3 for 100 pesos. That's the message. Now the spelling of paste. Now again, it is the influence, the phonological influence of the first language and the second language term paste. Now, violent, this is something very funny. Violent kamote for sale, 25 pesos. Now, kamote is the sweet yam in the Philippines. Now, there are varieties where the flesh is violet or purple. And, I mean, this kind of yam is is attractive to Filipinos. Now the price is only 25 pesos, but you know the sign prepared, the notice prepared by the person is something funny, violent, and so the joke is, oh, I'm afraid of these camotes. They are violent. They are violent. Now, thank you for your patience. You see this misspelled word? The one who prepared this did not know the difference between patience and patience. You're the best teacher ever. The error here is your, because your and you are, the contracted form of you are very similar phonologically. Please use tongue or tissue paper when making your selection. You know, if you want to buy donuts, do not touch the donut. You have to use the tongue or you have to use tissue paper. Now, the spelling of tongue, probably the one who prepared this is very much familiar with the spelling of tongue. And so, you know, the resulting notice is very funny. You use your tongue or tissue paper when making your selection. So your errors can be, can result in something that's funny or embarrassing or what. Please, no smoking food or beverages permitted in the clinic. Now, it's the correct division of thought units here. Please, no smoking food or beverages permitted in the clinic. Actually, the message here is, please, no smoking. There is problem on parallelism also. No smoking, no food or beverages, or no smoking, and then food beverages not permitted in the clinic. Actually, that's the message. It can be recast in another way. Now, in the Philippines, if you see this kind of message, the Filipinos will understand it. Now, I think, was it Richards or somebody who classified errors as global? A linguist classified errors in English as global or local. Local errors are those errors that may still put across the message in spite of grammatical errors. Now, global errors are errors where the message is no longer, what's written is no longer intelligible. You cannot get the message. Now, in this case, if the Filipinos share a common culture. They know this, so even if there are errors in grammar, they're able to get the message. So the error may be considered local, but for foreigners, probably this might be considered a global error. So when there are errors, you know, the purpose of language is communication. If you're able to communicate, so the error may take a backseat at the moment, although the ideal is that let us not commit the error so that our English will be intelligible to all people who speak English, not only to the people who share, not only to those whose culture we share with them. For example, in the Philippines, we share a common culture, so some errors may be negligible. But if somebody who does not share the culture of the Filipinos, the message will not be conveyed appropriately. Now, in this, so you see, these are the errors. I think our teachers of science who use English must be aware of this because we want them to be proficient to a certain level where they feel comfortable in using the language, to communicate with students, where they use the language to learn further the subject matter, where they use the language to communicate, to learn, to communicate with the rest of the community and with all stakeholders in the school. Now, so I would like to elaborate on some more ideas. And for my brief outline, I want to elaborate on these things which I want to emphasize, that I want our science teacher to reach a proficiency level that will be comfortable for both students, that will make the teacher perform his dual role, that is, as a teacher of the subject matter and as a teacher of English at the same time. One time, there were Japanese visitors in our at the Philippine Normal College University, and they observed a science class in the laboratory school, the place where we do practice teaching for student teachers. And you know the comment given by the Japanese educators who observed the class in science? They told me, Dr. Romero, your science class is like an English class. So you see, probably the teacher did match teaching on the English component of the lesson because probably the students had a hard time understanding the text used in the subject. So I think as science teacher, we have to strike a balance also. Let's not overdo our teaching of the language. Let us remember that our concern is the subject matter, but at the same time, we have to be alert if the students are able to use the language in order to learn the subject matter. Now, how to strike a balance, it depends on particular situations, on particular classes, in particular places. You know, there are classes where students are fluent already in English, so there will be less problems. But in places where English is really very foreign to the students, I think it will be very difficult to use learning materials where English is used as a medium, either in the textbook or in the discussion component of the lesson. Now, so I would like to, before I elaborate on some key ideas that I would like to share with you, this is the flow of the ideas that I want to share with you. I have some background notes or assumptions about the audience that we have now in the seminar, and then enhancing the proficiency in the target languages, which is English. That is what we want to happen. What is expected of the teacher? Why do we want to enhance the proficiency in the target language? And what are the challenges so that we will be able to witness what is expected of the science teacher using English as the medium of instruction. And then, of course, if we want to enhance the proficiency in English of the science teachers, what are some prospects? What are some possibilities for teachers continuing growth in the language? Now, we know teachers of Taiwan teaching science know their English, but we still believe that there is always a need to enhance our growth in the language. We know that language changes. Language is not static, it keeps on changing, especially the vocabulary component. The vocabulary component is the most fluid of the aspects of language. Some old words will have a new meaning. And meaning, we have words with multiple meanings. And we have words that are coined recently. There are new words that come. There are new words that become archaic such that they are no longer used. So we have to grow even if we think that we have reached a level of proficiency and you are confident that you can teach science very well. I think we still need this continuing growth in the language. In science, there are new terms that are coined. There are new terms that evolve. There is new literature in science, and we have to be familiar with the topics, with the new words, with the vocabulary that evolve. Now, and then, okay, so some of the background notes. First, we must be aware, I think, we are in agreement that English is a foreign language to Taiwanese. The medium of instruction in science is English. The audience in this seminar are science teachers in basic education, or probably some are in college, who are non-native speakers of English. Students are likewise non-native speakers of English in general. So this is the kind of audience that we have in this webinar. And teachers are assumed we assume that the teachers attending this webinar are assumed to have an adequate preparation to teach the subject. So we don't consider that the teachers attending this seminar had a problem as far as subject matter is concerned. If they teach biology, if they teach chemistry, if they teach physics, the assumption is they know their subject matter. They have been prepared adequately. Hence, problem regarding mastery of subject matter is not much of a concern. Another uh, idea that I assume as far as this audience is concerned, the teacher's proficiency level in the use of English as medium of instruction needs enhancement, similar to teacher needs in other countries where English is used in teaching by teachers who are non-native speakers of English in varying contexts. So we may have this proficiency level, but I still believe that our proficiency level can still be improved over time. But at least we have the enabling foundational skills to learn further the English language. Because as I said, language keep on changing, many words come and go, so we have to be updated. And we must have that attitude to grow in the language. Teachers' concern on language is two-pronged, or on learners, I mean, is two-pronged. So when we face a group of students, we have in mind a group of students who are non-native speakers of English. So as a teacher, you cannot assume that you assign them to read the textbook and they understood what they read on the text right away. So you must have a way, you must be innovative in finding ways whether students semantically process the book, the text appropriately. Did they get the message of what the book is saying? Did your grade 3 children got the message on how plants make food? Well, they can pronounce the word photosynthesis. They know what stomata is. They know what capillaries are. But as a whole, did they get the message? So we teach language tangentially because science teachers are not English teachers. They are not language teachers. But it's necessary that they become language teachers because of the medium of instruction. They teach language tangentially, serendipitously, or even consciously, informally, or on the side. Or sometimes you just translate. Especially so if the science teacher do not have the capability of explaining that to the students the language, the structure of the language, why it should not be said this way, why the report should be written this way. Now, what do we expect from the science teachers? You know, I tried to put together these ideas out of experience, out of observation, out of, I was able to teach science in my first year of teaching when I was a fresh graduate. And I taught for almost 4 years, and I taught all subjects in the elementary level, including science. And I had the opportunity to attend the science seminars also. And when I went to the Philippine Normal University, I observed classes and I observed science teachers when I was Dean of the College of Education. So I have an idea of what to expect from the science teacher, considering that the science teacher is also a language teacher. I think that is, let's say, default. If you are a science teacher where the medium of instruction is a foreign language, it is assumed that you know the target language. And we must have an open mind to keep on learning the language. Now, the first one is we need oral fluency is needed. They say that teaching is a talking profession, so we keep on talking. Science teachers keep on talking, so we need to be fluent orally. using intelligible English. And at the same time, I would say, if you are an English teacher of science or in any subject like that, whether you teach geography, history, psychology, or whatever subject, I think you must have that kind of fluency where you can serve also as a model of the English language, so that while students are learning subject matter, concurrently, they learn also the English language. They need English language for science because the language of, we cannot help, but English is used widely in research in English. And if we want to be updated in science, we have to be able to read English, to listen to English lectures in science, etc. Because many English speaking, native speaking people are the ones doing advanced research in science. So we have to know the language that they use in publishing their research uh, and their inventions. Now, the teacher of science is also expected to be competent in both the receptive form and productive form of the language. When we say receptive form, we refer here actually to the four modes of communication, or what you call the macro skills. The first one is listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Competence in the language includes all those four, although we may add appropriate use of the language. Now, when we say receptive, we are receiving information. I mean, that is the loose definition. So listening and reading are considered the receptive forms. The teachers must be good in listening skills in English and reading skills in English. Well, that doesn't need an elaborate explanation why you have to be good in listening to English lectures, to English conversations, to English talks, etc. You must also be good in reading, because many of our sources of information, whether they are in digital form or in the traditional print, we have to read and semantically process all this material so that we will be able to get the information and be critical consumer of this information that we get. Now, competence in both the receptive and in the receptive level are very important. Now, what are the productive forms of the language? This is speaking and writing. Now, many would consider speaking and writing as more difficult than the receptive skills. But by all means, we must be good in these forms of the language, the productive forms. We must be able to express ourselves, just like what I mentioned earlier. Oral fluency is a productive form of the language. We must be able to write. So in other words, we produce something. We must write something, we must say something, and use the language appropriately. That's another expectation of the science teacher. Now, another expectation is, well, above is knowledge of subject matter and the specific language that goes with it. If you are a science teacher, of course, it is assumed that normally you will be familiar with the parlance in science. If you are in law, you must know the legal language. Now, if you are in political science, you must know all the terms related to political science. Now, you are a science teacher, you must be familiar at least minimally with the language of science. When you talk to people, more or less, when you conduct a conversation with some people in the profession, you more or less can detect what the specialization of that person is. You will be able to say, oh, this person must be in international studies. Oh, this person must be a lawyer. Oh, this person must be a biologist, because of the language that they use, meaning they have a mastery, they have some knowledge, They have knowledge of the subject matter, and their knowledge is reflected in the language that they use. Now, this one, the fourth one, which is quite challenging. Even if you're a science teacher, we expect you, well, we expect the first one, knowledge of the language. That's a given. That's expected of you. Now, knowledge about the language is the very challenging one because you are not in linguistics, you are not, you were not trained to be a language teacher, to know the nuances of the workings of a language, and that is all about knowing about the language. And the example I gave a while ago, why it should not be correct to say I gave the book to she, I gave the book to her is the correct utterance. Now, if you say I gave the book to she, if the person knows something about the language, the person will be able to explain to the student that she, I gave the book to she is not correct because there is a preposition, and the pronoun after a preposition must be on the objective case. So in language, you know your grammar, you know the grammatical structure of the language, you know its morphology, you know its pragmatics. So you must know something about the language. You know when to use the word appropriately. You know, it's not just knowing the grammar, by the way. If you use language, if you use words not in the appropriate, not appropriately, then that's not even considered competence. Okay, so going back to this, the science teacher must have the knowledge of the language and a knowledge about the language. At least the basic rules you must know. Oh, you don't say the children is playing. We should say the children are playing. Now, some errors, though, if you will observe among our students, is that they are in the possible causes may be interlanguage or intralanguage. You know, when we do some analysis of the errors, linguists have classified possible causes as either interlanguage or intralanguage, or even the third, developmental in nature. Fellow teachers, what we may consider as errors possibly caused by this factor term as interlanguage is that it is caused by the interference of the mother tongue of the first language or first language. So, for example, in Philippine languages, we have only one pronoun for his, for she, and he. We don't have a distinction for gender or sex. Whether male or female, we say siya. Siya ay maganda. She is beautiful, or siya ay mabait. She is kind. Siya can be a male or a female. Now, when the students learn English, it's possible that in English they will keep on interchanging he or she because they are not conscious that in English there are specific pronouns for the male and the female. But because of the interference of the first language, they commit that error. Sometimes in English, they're talking about a girl, and then in the next sentence, they will say he. For example, they say, Maria went to town. He bought something. So the student may use he instead of she because in the native language, there is only one, siya. There is no distinction on pronouns regarding male or female. So that is it. We have some expectations. Now, because we have some expectations of the science teachers, there are challenges. How do we go about this? How do we work together so that we science teachers can be more effective? Especially so that your subject is very important. Especially that your subject is very valuable in these days when We call for innovations, we call for inventions, etc., etc., etc. And we owe it to science people that we have these advances in technology. So we really have high expectations from science teachers. And so we have to reflect on challenges that we have to meet so that we will be more effective science teachers. Now, these are the challenges that came into my mind. Do you have opportunities for self-growth? Do you consciously provide opportunities for your own selves to grow in the language? Or do you wait? Do you have to wait for some outside forces to make you grow? Do you have that innate, do you have that intrinsic motivation to learn further the language, either in a formal way, or do you intend to attend school so that you will grow in that area, both growth in subject matter or both growth in the language? And then, well, we have to, I do not know if we entertain opportunities, if we consciously look for opportunities. So the other one, a challenge, need for appropriate exposure. Of course, I will count on my experiences in the Philippines. In the Philippines, there are what we call urban schools, those in the cities, and then we have schools in far-flung areas, which you may call those in the countryside. And usually, the teachers who teach in the urban areas have more exposure to educational activities or educational experiences. What about those in the rural areas, those in the countryside? Okay. Now, our teachers should be exposed to both the passive and active forms of the language, to listening and speaking resources of information, and to active and resources for use of the active language. Do they have to offer the opportunities to use the language actively? Do they speak English? Do they write English? Do they write in English? Do they have enough exposure? Do they listen to lecturers? Do they invite lecturers? But of course, these days, because of the YouTube, because of the cell phone, because of mass media, there are more opportunities. But sometimes I think um, there are people who have to provide the proper guidance so that the exposure to our teachers also will be what is needed for them to become effective users of English as medium of instruction in the teaching of science. Now, another challenge is teacher attitude and motivation to grow in the language. What is the general attitude of teachers in Taiwan towards English? Um, do they enjoy learning English, or do they have that attitude? Why don't we just teach science in our native language so that the students will learn the concepts very well? That is one argument that we hear in the Philippines. Why don't we use our vernacular? Why don't we use our native language so that they will understand the concepts? They memorize the concepts and then they don't understand, and so they cannot even apply the concepts once they're outside the school. They just memorize the concept. So sometimes there is this attitude that negates the teacher's growth in the language. The motivation is, they're not motivated enough. I do not know how we are going to do this. It's something challenging, but it must be done. Probably one solution is giving proper incentives, and then, well, there must be incentives, and then there must be opportunities where it will be very convenient for the teacher to develop an interest in the language. And that is a challenge. And it's nice that we talk, we ventilate issues like in these seminars, in these webinars, so that we can talk about these issues. No one can give a total panacea of all these problems regarding the use of language, the use of English as medium of instruction. Its place, its locality has its particular problems. Some teachers are highly motivated to learn English, some are not, so we have to work on it. Sometimes the motivation varies in intensity. Some are highly motivated, some are motivated a little, some are not motivated at all. They just do it, they use English out of compliance. Some will even resort to translation to use the native language to teach the concept so that the students will learn the concepts. But that's not the whole idea. We want the students to learn the the subject matter side by side with the language. Because we are proactive, we think of the future. Future references will, the use of English in future sources of information will prevail, the use of English. So we have to prepare them for that. Although at times we have to do something so that the concept will be grasped appropriately by the students. Now, the challenge, of course, as I mentioned a while ago, is knowledge of the language and knowledge about the language. That is a challenge. And I want our teachers to remember that. Let us not just be satisfied of knowing the language, but we must know something about the language. We must review the phonological structure. We must review the grammar rules. Let us try to increase our vocabulary, the general vocabulary about knowledge of the world, and more words about your language, about your specific area. Because you just cannot focus on the terms in science. You have to interact with people. You have to be able to read research. You must know the language of research also. So, but specifically, of course, you must know general English as a tool, as an enabling tool to learn further the language. When I say enabling tool, we are lucky. We teachers in our curriculum, in the bachelor's level, I think we were given the sufficient tools about the English language. And so by having that tool, we have already the capability to learn by ourselves to improve in the language. It's like learning the computer. I would consider myself an example. I did not know how to use the computer long time ago, so I had to learn little by little. Now, when I learned the basics, you should know what enter is, what justify is, what these things are. You have to know the basics, and by knowing the basics, and then keep on practicing, tinkering all the things in the computer, you come to learn other things, you discover. But of course, you have to know the basics. You must know the place of the letters so that you can do your encoding fast enough. You must know what we mean, the terminology in the use of computer. When we say justify, what is justify? Because in general English, the meaning of justify is different from the word justify in the use of the computer. But once you have the basic enabling skills, you will be able to learn by yourself or with little assistance. You will know how to prepare your PowerPoint presentation. You will know how to use your Excel. You will know how to use other programs. So the same thing in English, and I would say we are lucky in our preparation, in our bachelor's degree. We have the basic tools. So use those tools to learn more about the language. Now, our prospects, our opportunities. What regarding opportunities, if we need some opportunities, before giving opportunities to teachers, we must have a continuing assessment of needs to base modified training programs responsive to localized needs, or probably to the needs of individuals. In the classroom, we talk about differentiated teaching. We talk about meeting meeting individual needs. Now, why is it that when we give training to teachers, we get them as a group? Do we have an assessment, a kind of assessment, where we try to discover the needs of particular teachers? I have a student who worked on the preparation of professional development training programs. And one of the things he found out in the study is that, for example, teachers, if it is an English seminar, some teachers would like more training in writing. Some would like more training in the teaching of literature. Some would like more training in teaching pronunciation. Yet when a seminar is conducted in the Philippines, in the things that she, as regards the data that he gathered in the paper, is that when seminars are conducted, all the topics are dictated by the powers that be, those who plan the seminar. These are the things that you are going to take up in the seminar without any consideration of individual needs. So I wonder, and one of the recommendations that master student wrote is that the needs of the particular needs of teachers should be considered in conducting seminars. Some teachers are no longer interested in grammar because they claim they know their grammar better than what they know in literature. They want more strategies in teaching of poetry. They want strategies on how to teach students how to write essays. They want strategies on how to make students do public speaking. So there must be differentiated topics in conducting professional work for teachers. And then another interesting finding is that the subjects of the study of the student is that teachers prefer different modalities in growing in something in their professional role. If you want them to grow in language, for example, how do you handle it? Do you offer one seminar for all? Do you know that the topics there will be, will be can be grouped as something that one size fits all type? Will the topics be interested to all the teachers there? Do they want a face-to-face kind of training? Is that modality good for all teachers? And you know, the interesting findings is that some teachers would like to give them print modules where they can read something and then they can be given an examination later. They claim that they can read something even when they are cooking. They can learn something, they can learn the grammar rules while sitting down in the kitchen, waiting for something to be cooked, etc., etc. Some would like lessons via texting. Some would like, they prefer other modalities, not only the one type that is face to face, where usually the teachers will be gathered in one place, and then there will be speakers on these topics and these topics. And so you will not be surprised to be hearing comments like some teachers say, "Oh, I know that already. I'm not interested in that topic." Yet they are forced to stay, and they claim that they think that is a waste of time. So when we offer possibilities for teacher training, whether it's in English or whatever, in updating content in science, I think we should be knowledgeable. We should be informed. We should have some information about the needs of teachers. And so this needs assessment is really very important. It may be an informal assessment. You will get an idea of what teachers need. If you are keen observers of what the teachers are doing, you will have a feel of what they really need. And probably if you cannot handle teachers one by one, at least you can group them. Oh, these 10 teachers want to be trained via online. Oh, I have 3 teachers who want a kind of training that should be done on a kind of face-to-face modality. And I want these teachers to be refreshed on grammar rules. And some teachers want to be refreshed own techniques in teaching students right compositions. So teachers' preferences, teachers' needs vary, and I do not know how we can meet that. Now, Taiwan has more resources than the Philippines. You are a rich country. Our country is not rich. We lack resources, and usually teachers are trained as groups, and I do not know how we can do that so that we can offer differentiated instruction for teacher in-service training. So that is one challenge, the opportunities that we give for our teachers by conducting using results of continuing assessment. Now, I mentioned this already, let us consider multimodality professional growth activities based on preference and availability of teachers. For example, online, self-learning print modules, face-to-face group sessions, and probably through some other means. And mapping differentiated topics in professional growth sessions based on needs analysis results. And as I mentioned a while ago, this can be done informally. Usually in some schools, there are department heads. And if that department head is highly sensitive of the needs of the teachers through their informal conversations, through observations, she will have an idea of what these teachers need. So based on the needs, the people concerned now can prepare topics to meet the individual needs of teachers. And now this one incentivize, okay, incentivize teacher efforts. There are teachers who are really motivated to learn by themselves. And we must have a way of finding out who these diligent teachers are trying to do their best to learn English, and let us have some incentives for them. The incentive may be, it may be something material, or it may just be a pat on the shoulder so that the teacher will feel that their efforts are recognized. And even if teachers are adults, they also need a pat on the shoulder. They need some words of praises. They need the reassurance that what they're doing is correct, that what they're doing is good for the system. So it's up for the innovative administrators, innovative heads of schools to think of incentives so that teachers will manage to grow by themselves even with least outside efforts. Now, the exposure to the language, what I mean here actually, it overlaps with the other topics. But when we give exposure to the language, do we send teachers to places where English is the native language? That's a very important and useful experience. Like, for example, we have students of Mandarin in Angeles university students. So when I was dean there, the first batch of undergraduate students went to Fujian University, and they were immersed there in a Chinese community. They stayed in the dorm, and then they learned Chinese very well because they couldn't help but learn the language. They will not survive. The motivation was very strong. They have to learn the language so that they will be able to buy something to eat. They must be able to learn the language so that they can ask where the certain thing is, how to go there, how to see this person, how to greet people. So the necessity was there. So the teachers in Taiwan exposed to opportunities where there are some exchange visitor programs in countries, uh, for example, where the native language is English, and then some teachers there would like to learn Chinese, and they come to Taiwan, or some other programs, scholarship programs, where teachers are sent to places where they are exposed to the native language. And we want a literate environment also in the local setting. Um, do we have enough people in the community who speak the language? Or is the language used very rarely or very seldom in the community where the teacher is? Does the teacher use English only in the classroom? Is the human environment that little so that English, the use of English is very limited? It's only in school. And then the non-human environment, is there a print-rich environment in the community where something is written in English and the teachers read these things and consciously or unconsciously they are exposed to the language and they learn the language? And that is related to the next one, the frequent use of the language in meaningful situations and practice in contrived situations. But of course, the ideal is for us to use the language in meaningful situations. You know, when I was in an American university, the Center for International Students gathered all non-native speakers of English. And this center conducts conversational English. So the Asians and other non-native speakers of English gather there there is a certain schedule, and then there is free coffee, and then there is somebody there who is a native speaker, a professor, or an A1 student who conducts, who carry out a conversation with the non-natives, with the foreign students that's in Syracuse University. We gather there, and the leader of the discussion, the one who conducts the conversation, is a native speaker of English. We just talk about anything in the sun, about the traffic, and then informally he will greet us, so we are able to get the way native speakers greet each other. Because I had an interesting experience. I was with a Chinese friend. We were walking on campus, and we met one of our professors. And then the professor said, as a way of greeting us, "Ladies, what's up?" And so my companion, who happened to be a Chinese, tried to look up, you know, because, well, that is an idiom, "what's up?" And it's not surprising that non-native speakers would not be able to understand that. So the conversation that was conducted in the International Center for Students expose us to idiomatic expressions, the way Native Americans would greet people, the way Native Americans, the terms that they use in everyday language. Of course, this may not be the kind of language that we will use in academic writing or informal composition, but at least for the oral aspect of the language, when we interact with native speakers of English, we will be understood and we will understand them. For example, I have a funny, well, it's kind of funny and sort of embarrassing experience when I was there. You know, I am a Filipino and my accent is very Filipino when I speak English. So I was asking an American friend who is a very, very native speaker of English and has never been outside of America. So she is not familiar with the Oriental accent because some Americans can communicate with any foreigner in the university. But this doctoral student lives in, where is this university? What is Osaka? It's in Osaka, the famous university there. What is that famous university? And I happen to have a friend in Osaka, in Cornell University. So I was asking the name of a certain place where the name of the state is Clinton. And I asked this friend, because my friend is from Osaka, where Cornell University is, my classmate, I mean, her name is Heather, very American. And I asked her, "Heather, can you take me to this street? I have a friend in Osaka and she lives in Clinton University." And then she said, "What, Angie? What street? Clinton University. What? You know, she asked me what 3 times. And so I had to write the word. And then she said, oh, you mean Clinton? You know, the last syllable was very much obscured. And so to be understood, you don't have to say Clinton. It has to be Clinton, you know. So I had to write the word so that I will be understood. So from that time on, I had to learn to talk the way they talk so that I will be able to talk to them. But you know, in the Philippines, you need not talk like that because intelligible English among Filipinos is not to be that way. We don't really try to imitate the native speakers of English. But I think the term that is important is intelligible English. I think we must be able to talk intelligible English so that we will be able to communicate with all kinds of speakers of the English language. Now, this frequent use of the language in meaningful situations and more practice in contrived situations. Now, what's next? Now, the teacher attitude, motivation to learn, and use the language. What do we do with teachers who have a negative attitude towards the English language? What do we do with teachers who are not motivated to learn and use the language? This is a big challenge, but we can create situations where we can do something about these problems. I once had an undergraduate, I was in an undergraduate class, I mean, who were not very much interested in reading print. And they were not interested to read these topics. You know, teenagers, these are undergraduate students, they are teenagers, and they would be very interested in reading love stories, etc. And I asked them what they want to read. I prepared a sample inventory of possible topics that they want to read. And so I listed all the possible topics on air. And then I asked them, give me 10 items that interest you most when you read. Rank them, which is number one, for example, which is number two. And then I asked them to list 10. And then I studied the responses that they gave me. And I found out the last topic was the topic that they don't want to read about is lives of saints. So that is the topic that they probably hate most. They don't want to read about that. Majority of them rank that is number 10. And I tried something. In the next week, you know, we meet 3 times a week. So the following Monday, I tried to get some materials on lives of saints, which are not in book form, but in comic form. And some are illustrations, just plain pictures, and then there's a paragraph below the picture, etc., etc. And then I provided other materials too about the topics that they did not like very much. The topics that rank number 8, that rank number 9, etc. And then I repeated the inventory. I distributed the inventory again and asked them to rank again the things that they want to read, to rank their preference. And you know that Lives of Saints went on top. So what did I discover? That motivation, that attitude can be changed by doing some little changes on the form of the reading material, etc. So the physical appearance of some material may change the attitude of the reading attitude of the students. Now, for example, here, their attitude in the use of English is negative. So what can you do? What pleasant experience can be given to teachers so that they will develop a positive attitude towards English if it so happens that they are not interested in the English language. So in other words, we have to exhaust our efforts. We have to be creative. We have to be innovative. We have to do something so that we will help teachers develop an interest in the English language so that they will be interested to learn more and in effect become more effective teachers of science where the medium of instruction is English. Now, conflict on language policies. You know, their attitude can be affected by conflict on language policies. In the Philippines, we had a problem of this kind some years ago. We have a national language which is Filipino, and the language base is Tagalog, and it's the national language. Now, there is a language in the southern part of the Philippines, in Cebu, where the people want Cebuano, which is one of the major languages in the Philippines, to be the national language. The claim is that in terms of plurality of speakers, there are more Cebuano speakers uh, than uh, Tagalog speakers. So, they did something. They did not want Tagalog. They even translated the national anthem into Cebuano. And there was a time there were policemen who went around the schools to warn teachers using Tagalog or Filipino in the classroom. So you see that kind of atmosphere that is not facilitated to the growth of English in that locality. So fortunately, that problem has been resolved. So English is now used, although now and then there will be problems that crop up, claiming that there should be more units to be offered in school using the national language. There will be more units to use the vernacular in the schools, because the latest language policy now in our school in basic education is the use of the vernacular or the mother tongue. Now, other factors may affect teacher attitude and motivation to learn and use the language. Probably there may be some traumatic experiences of the teachers regarding the use of English. So naturally, they will negate anything related to the English language. Now, knowledge of the language and knowledge about the language. Okay, I think I elaborated on this a while ago. Being able to use the language to serve one's purpose, knowing about the language, the phonological, morphological, syntax, writing system. So we can take, you have to learn this in your professional role offered by the school or on your own. In fact, many of us, like for example, if I use myself as an example, I think I learn more of English through readings and through practice by talking to people using the language. Now, this one is also very important. Appropriate, actual, and appropriate use of the language, whether in the receptive or productive forms. Listening and reading, speaking, reading, writing, organizing ideas. The word appropriate is very important. We consider competence, language competence now, not only being able to speak the language, not only being able to write in the language, but being able to use the language appropriately. For example, in the vocabulary component aspect of a language, there are synonyms. There are words with similar meanings. And we know for a fact that there is no complete synonymy. Words may be synonyms, but they are not exactly the same in meaning. There are shades of differences in the meaning, and they cannot be, many synonyms cannot be used interchangeably. There are co-occurrence restrictions. For example, if I ask you the synonyms of big, you will be able to give a number of synonyms like huge, large, tall, etc. Now, big may be a synonym of huge, but these words cannot be used interchangeably all the time. There are co-occurrence restrictions. One teacher, this is a common practice in many schools, they teach synonyms in isolation. They ask the children to enumerate synonyms of a certain word. And so students will get the dictionary or the thesaurus to get synonyms. And so one student said, all right, the teacher said, okay, you gave youths as a synonym of big. Can you use youths in a sentence? And you know what the student said? My mother is youths, meaning the mother is big. And another one said, my mother is spacious. You know, we don't use space. We use spaces for something inanimate. We don't use it for a human being. So we have to know these nuances. I mean, the appropriate use of the language, just like in clothing. The bathing suit is a kind of attire, but you don't use that in church. You have a long gown. You don't use that when you go to the beach. So there is the appropriate use of the language. Appropriateness is very important. So being able to give an utterance that is perfect in grammar is not necessarily competence. That is why we have pragmatics in language. We have to learn that it's not enough to know the rules, but apply the rules in appropriate situations. Now, reading, speaking, there are specific skills that we have to learn here. And the seminar is not enough to learn this, but as I said, there can be small professional group sessions. There can be subsequent seminars, making use of topics for specific groups interested in specific topics. You will never run out of literature in order to improve, to get information in order to improve our skills in these different areas of communication. Organizing ideas is also very important. And even among my graduate students, I find this to be a problem. Now,
Dr. Romero,
Jack,
sorry to interrupt.
yes,
It's 12 o'clock already, and
okay. So
yeah,
is it time to wind up?
yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Now, Jack Richards, this is one last topic that I would like to take up with you. I would like to encourage you to read on the literature that Jack Richards has about about this bridging gap. Many of us are good in the receptive forms of the language. We are good in listening. We are good in reading, but our productive competence remains relatively static. There is a gap. For example, we know many vocabulary words in listening, in speaking, but we don't use them when we talk, when we write. So there must be some efforts, according to Jack Richards, to bridge that gap. So in our professional growth, I wish let's do more of reading on these forms. And this one, in order to learn language, I think this is something interesting. For some of you may be familiar with this, but some may not be because they're science teachers and they may not have read something to this effect. But we may motivate them to read something about this. To learn a language, according to Prussian, it's enough to have input, make them listen to English, make them read English, and they learn English. But that was contested. And Smith said that there are two things needed, the noticing hypothesis and the output hypothesis. Meaning when students read something, call their attention to some aspects of the language so that they will learn the language. Rasen is interested in the input, but that is only the input. You get the meaning of the text. But the noticing hypothesis, you get the intake. You get the intake. So, for example, you are familiar with the word love, and the man said, "I love you" to the girl. I love you. He said that to the girl. And then in the paragraph, the student may be able to come across a sentence that also means "I love you," but he said it in another way. So you call the attention of the students. That is the noticing hypothesis. Class, what did the man say? Instead of saying "I love you," how did he say that to the lady? And so the students are made sensitive to the language and they are made to notice. That is the intake. The input is the understanding of the message, but the intake is sensitivity to a certain feature of the language, and that is learning the language. And the output hypothesis proposed by Swain is they must be able to use the language to reproduce the message using their own language, using their own syntax, and that is learning the language. Now, to close my sharing with you, I hope my 2 cents is worth listening to, that we are in the right track. We are doing something so that we will be effective users of the English language. It's not easy to learn the language, but we are trying hard, and I think we are on the right path, and I hope we continue our passion to learn the language in order to survive satisfactorily a globalized and internationalized world. Thank you. Good day.
Thank you so much, Dr. Romero. Thank you. I really, well, that's so much to cover with so little time, and apologize that we have only allocated like an hour and a half for your talk, but wonderful issues that you've raised and suggestions that you've given us. Um, Perhaps one question that I have before we go is you mentioned about language, knowledge of language and knowledge about language, but like in Taiwan, a certain group of scholars they are promoting English as a lingua franca, as opposed to like the standard English, because they were saying that non-native English speakers dominate or outnumbering native speakers. So they were like they're very loose about grammar, and they, for ELF speakers or research studies, they have identified non-native English speakers, lexical grammar, and spotting those grammatical like consistencies of like errors or deviations, and making it to become norms of of English as a lingua franca. And do you think promoting language as a lingua franca is a right way to go, as opposed to like standard English, when we're promoting like bilingual education in Taiwan?
Well, it has come of age that we have to recognize different varieties of English. Even in the Philippines, we have what we call Philippine English. So we have other kinds of Englishes, and they are respected. And when we use Philippine English, we understand one another in the Philippines. But the thing is, the keyword here, I believe, is intelligible. If we want to interact with people around the world who speak English, the advice is we must at least be able to use English intelligible enough that is that can be understood by many speakers of English, because many believe in descriptive grammar, not really prescriptive. In the past, we were highly prescriptive in grammar. I was trained English using prescriptive grammar, but these days, in the past, I was taught that we can never say it's me. It should be it's I, because is a linking verb, and the pronoun should be in the nominative case. But this time you hear it all over, they say it's me, and it's accepted. And I think the use of standard English the definition is becoming a little bit loose. There is a midway getting in between prescriptive and standard English. And my keyword there, my guide is I must be intelligible to Chinese when I speak English. I must be understood by the Spanish people. I must be understood by the Japanese. So if we adhere strictly to Philippine English, I will be limited to the Filipino audience. So we don't condemn people who speak their own variety of English. In fact, one
But
president of the,
what about
yes,
teacher training? What about teacher training? Should we should we insist on standard English, or is it lingua franca? Okay.
uh,
Okay.
let's be careful with the use of standard because we might interpret that as prescriptive grammar. But I think we can inform them the use of what we may call the normally used language. Because if we have our own variety and if we want to interact with other people, we lose the purpose. It defeats the purpose of using language for communication. Our purpose of language is to communicate with others. And if we stick to our own variety, it might be a kind of a disadvantage. It might be a bane and not a boon. So we try to strike a balance. When we talk to our own people, like for example, when I was in America, I tried to speak the way they do so that I will be understood. But when I went back to the Philippines, I will not be understood if I will talk the way they talk, you know. Uh, I will not say, Clinton. I will say Clinton so that I will be understood. So probably we can just strike a balance. Now, when we teach, I think it is safe to be guided by rules of grammar, but we can have some caveats with the audience
Be
that it's
flexible.
like this and like that. Yes, we can deviate from this. However, in formal writing, it's usually sticking to a certain extent to some rules, especially if it is in scientific journal, in research journals, where the readers, the consumers are high-level people who make use of formal English. You know, written English is kind of different from oral English, from conversational English. So let's be guided. That's a very good question. What do
Mhm.
we do? What do we use for teachers? Let's inform them that normally these are the things we use. But in Taiwan, we can deviate from this orally. But when we talk to Americans, let us try to do this if this is what they use. If most of the English-speaking people are using this, we might as well learn how to use this. But it's not bad. We don't condemn. I think that's the important thing there. Well, let us maintain the respect for different varieties of English. We don't say that they are not good. We don't say that they are bad. They serve their own purposes in their own places.
Thank you. Thank you for answering my question. Thank you so much. It was a very pleasant morning, and we really appreciate your sharing on this topic. Yeah, we really enjoyed it. Thank you. And thank you all the participants for staying with us. It's 12:10 already. Please stay tuned to our next webinar series for next week. And if you can please fill out the survey, we really appreciate your input. And let's give another round of applause to Dr. Angelita Romero. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Jane, Dr. Jane, and the
Yes,
Taiwanese educators.
thank you. Bye.